The morning sun crept slowly across the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pale gold. The farmer trudged along the dirt path that wound through his land, the weight of another hard day pressing against his shoulders. His boots scuffed the earth with a rhythm he knew all too well, the rhythm of routine, of a life carved out of repetition and endless work. The air was cool still, touched with the scent of dew and grass, but already he could feel the heat waiting just beyond the horizon, waiting to fall heavy on the fields. He adjusted the brim of his hat, squinting against the rising light, and sighed. Another day, another set of chores that would take him from dawn until the stars came out. That was the way of his life. That was the way it had always been. But that morning carried something different, something unseen yet undeniable. The birds that usually sang loudly from the trees were subdued, their calls scattered, cautious. The air felt heavy, almost expectant, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The farmer frowned, his brow furrowing as he walked past the line of oaks at the edge of his property, his hand brushing against the rough bark out of habit. He had walked this path for years, each stone and root familiar to him, yet that day the land seemed altered, almost foreign. It was then that he noticed something unusual. Ahead, near the bend in the trail where the trees thinned, there was movement. Or perhaps not movement but presence, a shape that didn't belong. He slowed his steps, cautious, eyes narrowing. At first he thought it might be a fallen branch or a shadow caught strangely in the morning light. But as he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a horse. Not just any horse, but a giant of a creature, its body towering and broad muscles visible even beneath the dust and grime clinging to its coat. Its mane hung in tangled ropes, its sides heaved with uneven breaths, and its eyes, large, dark and wild, watched him with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. But what froze the farmer where he stood was not the size of the horse, nor its condition. It was the thick chain looped around its neck, running taut to the trunk of a gnarled old tree. The iron links bit deep into the bark where they had been fastened, leaving scars in the wood. The horse tugged weakly against it once, the chain rattling, then lowered its head in defeat. The farmer's heart thudded in his chest. Horses roamed the land freely sometimes, strays from nearby ranches or wild ones from deeper plains, but he had never seen one chained like this, never seen one abandoned in such a way. He stepped closer, his boots crunching softly on the ground, his hands lifted slightly as though approaching a frightened child. The horse's ears flicked back, nostrils flaring, but it did not move to bolt. It couldn't. And then the farmer saw it, tucked beneath one of the heavy links of chain, fluttering slightly in the breeze. A piece of paper, folded and crumpled, pinned awkwardly against the metal. A note. His throat tightened as he reached out, carefully sliding the paper free. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it, the edges smudged with dirt, the handwriting rough, hurried, as though written in desperation. His eyes scanned the words, each one striking harder than the last. Whoever finds this horse, beware. It carries a burden not meant for the weak. Do not set it free unless you are ready to face what follows. The farmer's brow furrowed. He read it again and again, his mind trying to make sense of the warning. A burden, a threat. He glanced at the horse, its sides shivering with fatigue, sweat clinging to its coat despite the morning cool. Its eyes met his again, and for a moment he swore there was something in that gaze. Something almost human, something pleading. Logic told him to step back, to walk away. This was not his problem. Someone else had chained the horse here, someone who had left a warning, and interfering could bring nothing but trouble. But another part of him, quieter yet stronger, stirred within. It was the same part that had kept him tending his land despite years of hardship, the same part that had carried him through nights of loss and silence. Compassion. Duty. He reached out slowly, his hand brushing against the horse's muzzle. The animal flinched, then stilled, breath hot against his skin. Its eyes closed briefly, as though in relief at even that small kindness. The farmer exhaled, a decision already forming in his chest. He looked again at the note, the ink smeared but the warning clear. Do not set it free unless you are ready to face what follows. He folded the paper, tucking it into his pocket, and studied the chain. Heavy iron, too thick to break by hand, locked with a rusted clasp that seemed both cruel and final. He stepped back, weighing the moment. He knew that choice now stood before him. Walk away and leave the mystery chained to the tree, or act and face whatever consequence lay hidden in those words. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest sound, like distant hoofbeats across the plains. The farmer's eyes flicked to the horizon, but there was nothing there, only silence, only stillness. He looked again at the horse, at its trembling body, at the way it leaned against the chain as though surrendering to its fate. The farmer's hand closed around the clasp, testing its weight, its rusted edge biting into his palm. His heart pounded. Somewhere inside him he knew, Whatever he chose in that moment would change everything, and then, with a slow, steady breath, he made his choice. The farmer's fingers lingered on the lock, rough calloused skin pressing against cold iron. He could almost hear the weight of the decision in the silence around him, like the land itself was holding its breath. The horse shifted slightly, the chain rattling, its massive body tense with a mixture of fear and hope. The farmer closed his eyes for a moment, as though listening inward, and then pulled. The lock resisted, the rust biting back, but years of working the land had given his hands a strength born of necessity. With a sharp snap, the corroded metal gave way. The chain loosened, slackening across the horse's chest, sliding to the ground with a heavy clatter that echoed through the trees. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The horse stood frozen, nostrils flaring, muscles taut as though it couldn't believe it was free. The farmer stepped back, unsure if it would bolt or collapse. Then, with a sudden, shuddering breath, the animal stumbled forward. Its hooves struck the ground unsteady at first, then firmer, as though reclaiming its strength one step at a time. It lowered its massive head, pressing its muzzle briefly against the farmer's shoulder before moving past him, the gesture so deliberate it sent a chill through the man's spine. The farmer's chest tightened. He wasn't a man who believed in omens or signs, but there was something in that touch, gratitude perhaps, or a bond already being forged in silence. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand against the horse's dusty coat. "You're free now," he murmured, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. The note's warning echoed in his mind. "Do not set it free unless you are ready to face what follows." The horse walked a few paces away, its massive frame almost glowing under the morning light. But then it stopped, turned its head back toward the farmer and waited, as if it refused to leave him. The farmer frowned. This was no ordinary stray. Its presence was heavy, commanding, like something carved out of myth rather than flesh and bone. He stepped toward it cautiously, placing a hand against its neck. The heat of its body radiated through his palm, steady and strong despite the wariness trembling in its muscles. "We'll get you water," the farmer whispered, his practical instincts kicking in. "And food. Then we'll figure out what this is." He glanced again at the chain lying on the ground, the metal still holding the faint warmth of the horse's struggle. Something about it felt wrong, too heavy, too deliberate, as though meant not just to restrain but to imprison. He led the horse toward his farm, the great creature following without resistance. Each step echoed like a drumbeat across the empty land, and though the sun rose higher, the day felt strangely dim, as if a shadow had settled over the horizon. By the time they reached his homestead, the horse's breathing had steadied, though its eyes still carried that restless flicker, as though it was searching for something unseen. The farmer led it to the water trough, watching as it drank deeply, gulping down mouthfuls with a desperate thirst. He fetched grain from the barn, setting it out, and the horse ate with the same urgency, though every few moments it paused to glance around, ears flicking at sounds the farmer couldn't hear. After it finished, the farmer leaned against the fence, hat pulled low, studying the animal. "No, what in the world were you doing chained out there?" he muttered. "And who would leave you with a warning like that?" That night, sleep did not come easily. The farmer lay in his bed, staring at the wooden ceiling, the note unfolded on the table beside him. The words glared back, sharp and unyielding. "It carries a burden not meant for the weak." He turned over, closing his eyes, but his dreams were restless. He saw visions of storm clouds rolling across endless plains, of shadows chasing him through the trees, of the horse's eyes glowing like embers in the dark. When dawn came, he rose to check on it again. The horse stood near the barn, calm yet watchful, its massive frame framed against the pale light of morning. The farmer approached, offering a soft word, and the horse dipped its head in acknowledgement. For a brief moment, he felt a strange comfort in its presence, as though he were not alone anymore. But that illusion shattered when he noticed something new. Etched faintly into the horse's hide near its shoulder was a mark, scarred into the flesh, an emblem shaped like a circle split by a jagged line. It was subtle, almost hidden beneath the hair, but clear enough to see in the light. The farmer's stomach knotted. This was no wild horse. It bore a brand, but not one he recognized from any ranch in the region. He touched the mark lightly, and the horse shivered, letting out a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down the farmer's spine. It wasn't a whinny or a snort, but something deeper, like a warning. The farmer stepped back, his heart pounding. That evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, a sound reached the farm. Hoofbeats, faint but unmistakable. The farmer froze, listening. They grew louder, more insistent, until he could see dust rising on the far edge of the land. A group of riders emerged, dark shapes against the fading light, moving with purpose. There were 5 of them, dressed in worn coats, rifles slung across their saddles, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. The farmer's hand instinctively went to the axe leaning against the porch rail. He wasn't a man of violence, but something told him this visit was not a friendly one. The riders slowed as they reached the gate, their leader, a tall man with a scar running across his cheek, eyeing the horse tied near the barn, his lips curled into a cold smile. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you," the man said, his voice low and edged with menace. "Best you hand it over before trouble finds you." The farmer tightened his grip on the axe handle. His eyes flicked toward the horse, which stood tall, ears pinned, eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen before. Trouble had already found him. The warning in the note was beginning to unfold, and deep down he knew this was only the beginning. The silence that followed the scared rider's words was heavier than any storm. The farmer stood still on the porch, his grip on the axe handle tightening, while the horse shifted restlessly near the barn, its hooves striking the dirt with a sharp, ringing sound. The riders waited, their presence filling the yard like a dark cloud. The scarred man leaned forward in his saddle, eyes narrowing. "You hear me, old man? That horse isn't yours. You've no idea what you've got tied up here. Best hand it over before you make enemies you can't fight." The farmer swallowed, his throat dry. "It was chained in the woods," he said finally, voice steady though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Starving. Dying. I couldn't leave it there." The scared man chuckled, though there was no humor in the sound. "That chain was the only thing keeping you safe. You've set loose something you can't control." He tilted his head, the cruel smile widening. "Now last chance. Step aside, and we'll take what belongs to us." The farmer glanced at the horse, its eyes locked on the rider's, ears pinned flat, muscles coiled like a storm waiting to break. There was no fear in its stance, only fury. The farmer's chest tightened. He had felt it too, that this creature was no ordinary beast. But whatever mystery bound it, he knew one thing for certain. He could not hand it over to men like these. He stepped down from the porch, axe still in hand. "If it's yours," he said, voice firm, "why chain it like a prisoner?" The scared man's expression hardened. He motioned with his hand, and the riders began to dismount, boots striking the earth in unison. Each man carried the weight of someone who had fought too many battles and left mercy behind long ago. The farmer's pulse quickened. He was just one man, with no gun at his side, only an axe and resolve. Before anyone could move further, the horse let out a sound that split the air, a scream, piercing and primal, unlike anything the farmer had ever heard from an animal. The riders froze for a heartbeat, startled. The horse reared, front hooves lashing at the air, its mane whipping like fire in the dim light. The force of its presence sent a ripple through the air itself, and for a moment even the scared man's face lost its composure. Then chaos erupted. One rider lunged forward, rope in hand, aiming to snare the animal. But the horse lunged with terrifying speed, teeth flashing, hooves striking with bone-crushing power. The rope snapped from the man's grip, and he stumbled back, cursing. Another rider raised his rifle, but before he could aim, the farmer swung his axe, burying the blade into the wooden post beside him with a crack that rang out like thunder. "No," he shouted, his voice raw with defiance. The scarred man's eyes narrowed to slits. "You've made your choice," he said coldly. With a sharp whistle, he signaled his men. 3 of them advanced, circling wide to trap both the horse and the farmer. The horse charged. It moved like no ordinary beast, its massive body surging with an unnatural strength. One rider was thrown aside as the animal's shoulder struck him, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Another swung his rope again, but the horse snapped it with a violent jerk, the fibers fraying like thread. The third man fired a shot into the air, the sound cracking through the dusk, but the horse did not flinch. It moved straight at him, forcing him to dive aside. Through the chaos, the scarred man sat calmly on his horse, watching his smile returning. "Fool," he muttered under his breath. "You've bound yourself to it." The farmer's chest heaved as he swung the axe again, forcing back one of the riders who tried to corner him. His hands shook from adrenaline, his mind screaming at him to run, yet his body stood firm, rooted by something deeper than fear. He had saved this creature once, and now it was saving him in return. After a long and brutal minute, the remaining riders scrambled back, their coats torn, faces twisted with frustration. One limped toward his horse, another clutched his bleeding arm where the animal's teeth had torn into flesh. The scarred man raised a hand, signaling them to stop. The fight was over, not because they had given up, but because they had realized the cost of pressing further. He stared at the farmer with eyes like steel. "You don't understand what you've done," he said, voice low and venomous. "That animal carries a curse. A burden passed down long before you. You think it's loyalty that binds it to you. No, it's fate. and fate is merciless. He turned his horse with a sharp tug of the reins. "We'll be back," he promised. "And when we come, you'll wish you had handed it over tonight." With that, the riders retreated, their silhouettes swallowed by the darkening horizon, leaving behind only the lingering echo of hoofbeats. The farmer stood in the yard, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. The horse approached him slowly, lowering its head until its muzzle brushed his shoulder. He let out a trembling breath, dropping the axe to the dirt. His hand rose to the animal's neck, fingers sinking into the thick mane. "What are you?" he whispered, voice hoarse. The horse's eyes met his, and for a fleeting second, the farmer swore he saw something there, something human, something knowing. His heart clenched. This wasn't just an animal bound by chains. It was bound by something far greater, something now tied to him as well. That night, as the farmer sat by the fire, the note lay before him again. The words burned into his mind. "Do not set it free unless you are ready to face what follows." He understood now. Freedom had a price, and he had already begun to pay it. Outside, the wind howled through the fields, carrying with it the faint echo of distant hoofbeats. The farmer closed his eyes, knowing sleep would not come. The storm that had begun with a broken chain was far from over, and somewhere in the darkness, beyond the edges of his land, the men who had left that horse chained to a tree were gathering, waiting, and planning their return. The night stretched long, heavy with silence. The farmer did not sleep. He sat in the dim glow of his lantern, staring at the folded note on the table, its words etched into his mind like a brand. The horse shifted restlessly outside the window, its silhouette moving against the pale light of the moon. Every so often, it lifted its head, ears twitching, as if listening for something the farmer could not hear. Dawn broke slow and cold. The farmer stepped outside, breath clouding in the chill, eyes scanning the horizon. The world looked deceptively calm, the fields blanketed in mist. But beneath that stillness his gut told him danger lingered, waiting just beyond sight. By midday his unease sharpened into certainty. A crow circled overhead, its cry harsh and grating. The horse stood rigid by the fence, muscles taut, nostrils flaring. Then, faint but undeniable, came the sound: hoofbeats, not one or two but many, rolling like distant thunder. The farmer's chest tightened. He reached for his axe, though deep down he knew it would be no match for what was coming. The scarred rider had promised to return, and promises like his were never broken. The riders appeared on the ridge, dark shapes against the sun. More this time, at least a dozen, armed and grim. At their head rode the scarred man, his coat billowing like a shadow. He raised a hand and the group descended toward the farm, the ground trembling beneath their approach. The horse let out that same primal scream as before, hooves tearing into the earth. Its eyes burned with an intensity that sent shivers down the farmer's spine. He placed a hand on its neck, whispering low, "Stand together." The riders fanned out, surrounding the yard. The scarred man dismounted, boots crunching on gravel, eyes locked on the farmer. "This is your last chance," he said, voice like ice. "Step aside. That beast carries a legacy older than you can imagine. You are not its master, you are its servant. Do not make me prove it." The farmer squared his shoulders, gripping the axe tighter. "If you want it," he said, "you'll have to go through me." The scarred man's smile was thin, cruel. He snapped his fingers. The riders advanced, rifles lifted, ropes swung. The horse exploded into motion, a force of nature unleashed. It charged, hooves pounding like war drums, eyes blazing. It slammed into the first rider with bone-breaking force, sent another tumbling into the dirt with a kick that cracked like thunder. The farmer swung his axe, knocking a rifle from one man's grip, then ducked as another fired, a bullet whistling past his ear. Chaos consumed the yard. Men shouted, gunfire cracked, dust and blood filled the air. But no matter how many ropes they threw, no matter how many bullets they fired, the horse would not fall. It fought with a fury that seemed more than animal, as though something ancient burned inside it. The farmer felt it too. Each time his hand touched the horse, strength surged through him, fear falling away. He moved with a clarity he had never known, every swing of the axe landing true, every step in perfect rhythm with the beast beside him. Man and horse bound not by chance but by something deeper. The scarred man watched, his face twisted with rage and something else, fear. At last he drew his pistol, the silver glinting in the sun. He aimed, not at the farmer but at the horse. Time seemed to slow. The farmer saw the gun rise, saw the finger tighten on the trigger. Instinct roared louder than thought. He threw himself forward, arms wrapping around the horse's neck. The shot rang out. Pain seared his side. He stumbled but did not fall, clutching the horse tighter. The animal reared with a scream that shook the air, hooves lashing down. The scared man's pistol flew from his grip, clattering across the dirt. He stumbled back, eyes wide, disbelief etched into his scared face. Then the horse surged forward, eyes locked on him. The scared man turned to flee, but too late. The horse struck, sending him crashing into the ground. He lay still, breath shallow, his men frozen in shock. Silence fell, broken only by the farmer's ragged breathing. The riders, leaderless and shaken, scrambled onto their horses and fled, dust trailing behind them until they vanished over the ridge. The farmer sank to his knees, blood seeping through his shirt. The horse lowered its head, pressing its muzzle against him. He felt warmth radiate through his body, the pain easing, though he knew the wound was deep. Through the haze, he saw something shift in the horse's eyes. For a heartbeat, they were not the eyes of an animal but of something older, wiser, burdened with centuries of silence. And in that moment, the farmer understood. This was no ordinary horse. This was a guardian bound by chains not of iron but of fate. The note had not been a warning, it had been a truth. By freeing it, he had bound himself to its destiny. The farmer's lips trembled into a faint smile. "Then we face it together," he whispered. The horse snorted softly, as if in answer, and lowered itself to the ground beside him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fire and blood, man and beast rested side by side, two lives forever changed. The world would remember them not as a farmer and a chained horse, but as something greater. A bond forged in compassion, tested in battle, sealed in sacrifice. And though storms and enemies would come again, the farmer no longer feared. For he had found not just a companion but a destiny. A destiny that had begun the moment he found a giant horse chained to a tree, with a note that whispered of fate, and a choice that would change everything.